your sugar, please. Straight talk, sounds plenty sweet to me.
Seminar attendees at Raleigh Studios in Hollywood received a crash course in screenwriting from Tom Schulman, a true master of the craft. Mr. Schulman won the Screenplay Academy Award for writing Dead Poet Society. He also wrote the smash hit film What About Bob, starring Bill Murray, and co-wrote the family film blockbuster Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Mr. Schulman has also produced movies, including the provocative film Indecent Proposal, starring Robert Redford. This in-depth interview was conducted by James Jordan, screenplay consultant and owner of Candid Coverage.
Gentlemen, what are the 4 pillars?
Tradition, honor, discipline, excellence. Manners up.
Welton Academy for Boys, a breeding ground for the future leaders of America. An institution dedicated to achievement, virtue, and conformity. A school whose rigid standards are upheld by every single teacher, except one.
Come on, Mr. Overstreet, you twerp. Mr. Anderson, are you a man or an amoeba? Language was developed for one endeavor, and that is...
To communicate.
No! To woo women.
Mr. Keating?
Some people like to rock, some people like to roll, but moving and a grooving's gonna satisfy my soul. Let's have a party.
Touchstone Pictures presents Robin Williams as John Keating, teacher,
Well, is this a dagger I see before me?
philosopher,
I like Byron. I give him a 42, but I can't dance to him.
orator,
Oh, Titus, bring your friend hither.
and founder of the Dead Poet Society.
A bunch of guys sitting around reading poetry.
No. Ding. Thank you for playing anyway.
What was the Dead Poets Society?
The dead poets were dedicated to sucking the marrow out of life. Spirits soared, women swooned, and gods were created. Not a bad way to spend an evening, eh?
I hereby reconvene the Dead Poets Society.
To strive. To seek. To find.
Gotta do more. Gotta be more.
Dare to walk a new path. Dare to strike out and find new ground.
I'm hearing rumors, John, about some unorthodox teaching methods in your classroom.
Break out.
I'm gonna do it!
John Keating. He began by teaching English. Now, he's changing lives.
I got the part!
Tear out the entire introduction.
Who put you up to it? Was it this new man, this, Mr. Keating?
Are we just playing around out here? Or do we mean what we say?
Tradition, honor, discipline.
Rip, shred, tear.
What is this Dead Poet Society? I want names.
This is a battle, a war. And the casualties could be your hearts and souls.
For the first time in my whole life,
I know what I want to do.
medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits. Poetry, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for.
That's beautiful.
Sit down, Mr. Anderson.
Sit down.
What the hell is going on here?
Seize the day.
Touchstone Pictures presents Robin Williams as John Keating. He was the inspiration that made their lives extraordinary. Dead Poet Society.
Well, you people are in for a treat. This is an incredible gentleman. I've heard him speak many times. I've interviewed him a couple times at some Sherwood Oaks events. And if you have note paper and a pen, I would suggest take plenty of notes. Now you grew up, I'm going to start at the beginning here because we have something in common. You grew up in Nashville, I grew up in Ohio, but you got a BA in philosophy and from Vanderbilt, and I got a BA in philosophy from the University of Dayton. Right. And then you did something I didn't do. Then you went on to USC Film School. Was connections there that led to your first break in the entertainment industry, or was it something else?
Only if you look at it in the most sort of serially, linearly way. You know, I met a guy there who recommended another school where I met some people who then introduced me to some people who, 10 years later, yeah.
Okay, so well, I know that you wrote industrial films and you worked in the theater. Was that also among those connections that helped lead the path?
That school I'm talking about is a place called the Actors and Directors Lab. When I started at SC, I was interested I had made a little short film in Nashville and was interested in why the actors I couldn't relate or relate to or direct actors. So when I went to SC, I wanted to get into directing classes. And the first directing class was taught by a gentleman named Norman Torog, who was, I think, made more feature films than anybody in the history of Hollywood, almost 200 features, and for a year. But by the time he was at SC, he was about 94, blind, came in on a cane. We were making black and white silent films, and he was supposed to come in and critique the acting in the film. And he was literally blind. So, and the first class, he walked in with his cane and had a person helping him, and he said, I know I'm supposed to be teaching you about acting, and you're wondering how can I tell how good the acting is in your movies when I'm blind. And he said, the truth is you can smell a good movie by the way it goes through the sprocket holes. So run the films. So as it turned out, his specialty was comedy, and he would always listen to see if there were any laughs during the film, and if there weren't, he would go for them. And then he started telling stories about directing Elvis. So I got fairly frustrated with SC because there were, I went to see the heads of the department and said, you know, I want to learn about directing actors. How do you talk to actors? And they said, well, Hitchcock didn't know how to talk to actors, and he did okay. So I thought, well, that's not an answer. So a friend there recommended a teacher named Jack Garfine, who ran a place called the Actors and Directors Lab, and on Robertson in Beverly Hills. And so I left SC, went there, and the first day I was there, one of the students in the class said, I just got a job, just got a contract for 4 years to make educational films, and I need a crew. Anybody know how to work? And I raised my hand, and that was sort of my day job actually for the next almost 8 years, I guess. So he made industrials and educational films, and that was where I got that job.
Now, did that knowledge that you were gaining in production, even though it was industrial, was that something that would help you later on an unconscious level when you were in the future? I
think consciously, because we were making little 8 to 12 minute films. The educational films all had to have a little moral. You know, why not to drink or drive? How to eat a balanced meal. And and in writing some of those, and he would eventually give each of us who worked for him a chance to write or edit or assistant director. We were sort of all jacks of all trades there. So structuring those little films and trying to make them entertaining, but at the same time sort of suit the buyer. I think it was helpful. And at a certain point, he got raised some money to make a low budget feature, and that's where I sort of got my break to write my first script. He came in one day and said that his wife, who was a very successful potter, had met a group of people out where she was selling pottery, and wanted to put $90,000 into a horror film, and they wanted to do it right away. And so could anyone write a horror film in 5 days? So I said, I'll try it. So he said, well, what do you think? I said, well, maybe a mummy movie. I used to love those old mummy films. He said, all right, you're off for the week, go do it. So 5 days later, I came back with this script called Sarcophagus, which was 90 pages and had a kind of scary ending. And unfortunately, he showed it to the investors, and they said, we meant to mention we're all Mormons, and we don't want to do one of these horror, So he came back on Monday and said, who wants to write a family film? And I was too exhausted.
I would have picked you for the mummy movie.
Well, when you're starting, you do anything.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the moral for people here is that first break can come from anywhere.
Absolutely.
So just keep whatever your day job is, whatever you're doing, network and try different things.
That's right. Anybody read the book Outliers? It's an amazing book. I really recommend that. It's Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote Blink, and it's really about hard work and how you get lucky or not. I think one of the rules in there is 10,000 hours. You have to put 10,000 hours into your craft before you can become successful at it.
Ray Bradbury talked about that. He said he calculated that in all the years he was writing short stories and selling them, he figures he wrote about 1 million words before he didn't feel guilty cashing the checks that he got, because he actually felt like a professional. He said he cashed every check. He just felt like a hack until he'd done about 1 million words.
Wow.
So Now, your first feature script, Dead Poet Society, did better than most people's first script. It won an Academy Award in 1990. And then that same year, you had that great box office success with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Was one of those? Did you write one of those first?
I wrote Dead Poet Society actually in '85. So I think, and Honey I'd written right before it got shot. So
okay. So how, what was the story of how that sold?
Dead Poet Society. Oh man, I think I wrote it in '85, and I had an agent at the time. And I gave it to my agent, and he said, "This is one of the best things I've ever read. It's certainly the best thing you've ever written, and I have no chance of selling this." So you have two choices. I know you care passionately about it. You can keep working with me, and at some point maybe there'll be an opportunity, but probably there'll never be an opportunity for this one. It's not commercial.
Yeah.
So and he said, "So if you want to sell it, unfortunately, you've got to get another agent." So. I put it out there to 5 or 6 agents, and finally got one who I went into his office, and I remember he had his bare feet up on the desk, and was saying, I've read the first half of the script, and it's good, and I think there's some actors here at our agency that I can plug into this. So, and he was the only agent who responded to it at all. The others were just gave me dreadful reviews on it. So, and I remember for months just thinking, God, if he ever reads the second half, he's going to fire me as a client. So for about 2 years, he kicked around with it, and then a producer he had given it to named Stephen Haft called, and Stephen had read it maybe a month or two after I had signed with that agent, and didn't think it was commercial, but could never get it out of his head. So. But he wanted to option it, so I think he paid $1,000 for a year option. It was just no money at all, even back then. But my agent said, "Look, I'm not working on this anymore. Nobody's working on this anymore. At least this guy will pay some money, and he'll get out there." And I had been to all the studios. I remember one studio, someone at Disney, in fact, said, "There's no way I'm going to show this to Jeffrey Katzenberg. He'll just pass." And besides that, this poetry thing, you should make it more commercial. Why don't you make him a dance teacher? Call it Sultans of Strut.
You did say that the 3 worst words to put in a movie title were dead, poet, and society.
That's right.
You did them all 3.
Individually and collectively. So, but Stephen Haft had gone to high school with Jeffrey Katzenberg and gave him the script, and I think on a Friday. And I remember I had another spec script out there which sold that Monday morning. And about 5 in the morning, I really wasn't even thinking about the post at that point. It just seemed like it was dead. So, and I remember about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, my agent called and said, "Disney wants to buy Dead Poet Society, and we're going to make the deal tonight." This has got to be a joke. At midnight, he called and said, "Okay, we just made the deal." And I said, "Don't I get to know their notes or what they?" He said, "That's just not the way it's done. They buy it, I swallowed hard and said, "Okay." And a couple of weeks later, got about 15 pages of notes, which essentially disemboweled the whole thing. It started with, this teacher is the main character of the story, and yet he's hardly in it. Let's flip the story and start when he's a student at the school, and see how he became the type of guy he was, and so forth. I just broke out into a sweat, and I thought, they're going to win. And went to the first studio meeting, and Katzenberg was there, and there were a group of executives sitting over on the couch, and he said, he was looking at the notes, and said, "Who did the notes?" And a couple of them said, "Oh, it was a team. They're kind of rough. We need to polish them." And he said, "Kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, aren't you?" And they said, "Oh, maybe." And he threw the notes over his shoulder. Let's just make the move. So,
you know something about movies.
So that's incredibly what wouldn't happen today.
Now, how did Katzenberg get Robin Williams involved?
Yeah, okay. And he showed. He got Peter Weir. There were 2 other directors before Peter Weir got involved. We actually shot for a day with one director, and then the studio shut it down and said, "Burn the sets." They have actual footage of the sets. in an incinerator burning. And
that's a little disheartening.
It was very disheartening. But Jeffrey called me and said, we're only doing this because we think there's a better version of this out there with another director, so we're going to scuttle this and do it again. And 9 months later, we were shooting it again. So Peter Weir. So.
And then he brought in Robin.
Right? Yeah. Well, Robin came first, and then Peter. Okay.
Now, I was privileged to be at the Writers Guild, and we're sharing with the writers there about your process of writing. And I was so blown away by it. I was hoping you would repeat that for the group here, because it's a lesson in the fact that what writers do is incredibly hard. People that are writing and say it's easy aren't doing it right. And Tom's a testament to the fact that the process is involved, but the results are amazing when you get on with it.
Right. Well, some call it the process. I think it's more like chaos in my case. But and you're talking about the little notes.
Yeah, the binders and the whole.
Yeah. Usually, I think once the dawn of the computer age started, it got a little bit easier, but it was right in the transition for me with this one. But my general process is I just take a lot of notes, and I put those notes on little pieces of paper. I have a little pad in my wallet that I had specially made with a lifetime supply of these little pads that fit in this wallet. And so I make these notes, and every time I'm done, I just throw them in a drawer. And then at a certain point, when the drawer gets full, I type them into a file on the computer, and when I have 150 pages of notes like that, a lot of them are redundant. You wake up in the middle of the night with a great idea. It's the same idea you had 6 hours before. So there's a lot of that. But at a certain point, I start to think, I'm getting a sense of what the beginning, middle, and end of this story is. So at that point, and all the notes are typed into the computer, I arrange them, skip a space between every note, and I print them all out, and I slice each one into a separate piece of paper, and I'll have a stack about this high, and then I just take the first one off the top of the stack, I clear the floor, and I go, okay, this note, this is the beginning, this is something for the beginning. So I put it over on the left, and then I start putting these things all over the floor. Sometimes they'll go out into the hallway. And while this is happening, I also have a computer file open, and I'm getting other ideas. While
keep the windows shut, so there's no wind coming.
Oh yeah, no wind, and no dogs in the room, and I've had major problems with that on this film. And don't paper train a dog this way. And then, as this, it's sort of like playing with Tinker Toys in a way. It's a very relaxing process, and it takes forever. But at a certain point, I have all the notes, and I'm rearranging them as I'm getting ideas for new scenes and so forth, and I'm getting all the interstitial scenes coming. They come into my mind as I'm doing it, and then I take all those strips of paper and I take about 12 or 14 per page. And I put a piece of Scotch tape on them, and I Scotch tape them to a piece of 3-hole punch paper, and then I make a binder. And at that point, when it's done, I'll have anywhere from, depending on the size of the script, anywhere from about 175 to a 400-page binder of the script. And it literally is the script from beginning to end. I mean, as much as possible, because I'm so anxious about the whole thing working. I like to know that it works before I sit down to actually write it.
So you have snippets of dialogue.
Snippets of dialogue, suggestions for everything from costumes to descriptions to everything. And at that point, it's a Bible. I sit down and just use it. It's almost literally the script, although things will occur to me as I'm writing. But when that process is done, it's mostly done.
Now, have you found in this process that then, as you're starting to write script, you were being subconsciously led a different direction, and you let yourself go that direction?
Absolutely, yeah. And the first draft, in fact, all drafts, are just about trusting your instincts and trusting that if something bothers you, that there's something wrong, and working it through till it's fixed. So, and with Dead Poets, I thought I had an ending, and I didn't have an ending. So at a certain point, the ending that's now the movie occurred to me, and once that happened, I had to go back through and redo all the notes and throw a bunch of stuff away and so forth. So it's you're constantly literally walking from the beginning to the end of the script and backwards. But it's fun, but it can also be terrifying if you don't know where you're going. A lot of times you don't. It's like being on a psychiatrist's couch. You sit down and try to figure out what it is you're trying, what it is you're about, so what the script is about. At the same time, you're throwing out all this stuff. So and sometimes you don't get there. A lot of scripts just turn out to be probably good, not about anything.
Well, so they're just writing exercises that made you a better writer. But
I guess. At the time they felt like they were about something, but when it's over you think, I don't really know the theme of this. I thought I did. Thought I knew what the main character's struggle is, but I don't, and so forth. So, it's just, that's the crapshoot.
Well, you stuck the landing on Dead Poet Society. When those boys are standing on the desk at the end, it was just such a powerful moment in cinema history. And I just thought it was really a moving moment, really powerful. And it's interesting because you start off your career so illustriously with Dead Poet Society, and yet a lot of people would think of you as the high concept king because you've done Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and What About Bob, and you've produced Indecent Proposal. So you've done these incredibly high concept things that people can mention in an elevator and say, oh, what a great idea for a movie, or I love that movie. And so I'm just curious.
Dead Poets is high concept. Kids inspired by poetry.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's an easy
But
one.
if there was speed.
There you go. Yeah. I was wondering if you could walk us through the initial development of one of these high concept projects and sort of explain to us, because David was talking about pitching, in boot camp to get good at pitching. You were able to pitch some pretty high concept ideas to Hollywood, and they said, hey, this sounds pretty good, let's do it. How did you initially take one of these ideas and get people interested?
Well, a lot of those films you mentioned were actually other people's ideas. So, What About Bob was Lawrence Iskin and Alvin Sargent's idea. Indecent Proposal was a book, and I guess I can illustrate with that one. I used to play ping pong at 6 o'clock in the morning every day with my next door neighbor, a gentleman named Alex Gartner, and Alex was liked to read a lot, and one morning he said, I'm reading this book, it's really strange, but it's got a good idea in it, and it was the idea for Indecent Proposal. And the book is basically sort of the Arab-Israeli war played out on this battlefield. It's about an Arab buying an Israeli woman for $1 million. So that wasn't going to work. So we both thought, this is a great idea for a movie. So at the time I was working on the Paramount a lot, and I went in to see an executive named Teddy Z who worked there. And Teddy liked it and couldn't get anybody else at Paramount to spring for it. But at that point, we had made a very cheap deal for the book, and we found a writer who wasn't expensive. So Teddy paid for it out of his discretionary account. And then and Amy Jones was the writer. And during that time, Teddy was hired away to Sony. And didn't bother to tell any of the executives at Paramount about Indecent Proposal. And didn't bother to tell me that he hadn't told anybody. So, although we stayed in touch and he would say what's going on with that script and so forth, you should bring it over to Sony, he kept saying. But so one day, Amy finished the script, and it was a great script, and I turned it into the studio. And I got a call from Gary Lucchese, who was running the studio, and on that Monday, and he goes, Tom, we love this script. How much is it going to cost us to buy it? We owned it. So we tortured him a little bit, took him out to lunch, and sort of made he and a couple other executives sort of get in this bidding war with themselves. To the point, the price was just astronomical, and finally I had to say, damn it, you own the thing. And they were ecstatic, and they greenlit the movie and made it.
When did Robert Redford come on board?
Redford came in, Adrian Lyne came in, let's see, Gary Lucchese was gone, I think, 2 weeks later. Stanley Jaffe took over the studio. Sherry Lansing came in as a producer, and I think Adrian Lyne came, it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, Adrian Lyne came in, and Redford about a month after that. And, there was some question as to whether Redford was the right guy for it, because in the script, the billionaire was a darker guy. But by casting Redford in it, sort of turned into a fantasy, that it wasn't as a script. We sort of changed it all around. But
well, I think it also probably tripled the box office because everybody in the world was talking about it on the radio, and it really developed a lot of buzz.
Well, when I decided to pitch it, I was sitting in my office thinking about it. My secretary was in the other room. She was 21 years old and engaged. And so she said, what are you going to pitch? And I told her the gist of it, and she said, oh my God, my boyfriend and I would do that in a second. But she just got engaged, and she said, well, think what we could do with that money. It would be great. Maybe this thing's going to work.
Yeah. Well, leads to my next question. How do you test an idea to determine if it's funny or if it'll work? Because you mentioned, for example, Alvin Sargent was initially involved with What About Bob? He's a brilliant writer, and yet their decision was, you were the guy to bring in to make this funny and execute it. How do you tell yourself when you're writing, this is really funny or this is really good for this particular scene?
What About Bob was kind of, it worried me because Alvin Sargent's one of the great writers in Hollywood, and the fact that he didn't want to write it made me think there's a booby trap in here somewhere. And Alvin had written an idea, something like Bob, years before as a drama, and he just felt that he couldn't do it as a comedy. I wasn't sure I could either. But the idea always it made me chuckle or smile every time I thought of the notion of a patient driving his psychiatrist crazy. So, and so it struck me that it would work as a comedy. So you start playing with how is this going to work? First of all, who's the psychiatrist? How do we feel about him? What do we want to feel about him? It felt that in order for this guy should have a huge ego, therefore he should have a book out. He should have he should be on Good Morning America with his book, all things that the character of Bob could undo in the process. So it feels to me that once you start generating scenes, they're either, if they don't make me laugh, I know there's no hope of them making anybody else laugh. So I just, if they keep coming and they keep, they're funny, each scene, and it's scary because sometimes you just go, ooh, I'm 3/4 of the way through this and it's dying.
Well, it's funny. I read so many scripts that people ask me to do coverage for them that are comedies, and I'm like, I'm on page 15. I haven't laughed yet. And so if you're part of a writing team, I can see how you can test. But how do you sort of? Do you give it to trusted people? Do you just, because of your way that you know dialogue and comedy, that you just kind of trust your own judgment on it?
It's a little bit of both, but I try to tell the story to as many people as possible, and that's true with dramas and comedies. I remember years ago Paul Schrader said something that I've never forgotten, which is that if you don't see a little oh wow in the eyes of the person you're telling your story to, you don't have a story worth doing. And that it ought to get a hit, ought to have about a 9 out of 10 oh wows from friends and colleagues that you tell to. It's the same with a comedy. If you're telling them the story and they're not laughing, something's wrong. So I think testing your ideas a lot is key to this before you commit to putting the hours and 125 pages down.
Well, let's use an example because like Baby Steps from What About Bob?
Right.
It had me laughing out loud. It was just extremely funny. Where did you come up with the idea for that?
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
I knew we had to write a book, and I knew that Bob was not the kind of character that you were just going to instantly, there was no cure for Bob.
Yeah.
So I think it came out of thinking about what the doctor would say to Bob, that you really need to just, if you could just do one thing, you could get one step further, and then I thought of, baby step. And then I thought, that should be the name of his book.
Yeah.
So, it applied to Bob, it also applied to the book, and so forth.
From Baby Steps to Death Therapy.
Yeah, Death Therapy. Yeah. And all those things were just ways of Bob trying to justify the torture that Cleo Marvin, the psychiatrist, was putting him through. Because from Bob's point of view, everything the psychiatrist did was brilliant therapy. So death therapy just becomes, oh, I get it, that's what you're trying to cure me with, this fear of death. Great, brilliant, let's go.
I'm James Jordan. Hope you enjoyed this video. For links to other videos and lots of free articles about screenwriting, please visit candidcoverage.com. Thank you for watching.